What's up guys, today I'll be showing you my tips and tricks for warding as a support player. This advice will be divided into two parts, laning phase and the teamfight phase. Now, before I get into where you should ward, there are a few important concepts to note. The first is to know the difference between safe and unsafe warding to ensure that you are always safe warding. During the teamfight phase, you never ever want to face check a brush alone. This even includes warding the brush from a distance. You always either want to ward with your teammates, safe spot ward as in warding a brush over a wall so that you don't have to face check it, or the best is to just ward when you know your enemies are somewhere else. These blind face checks are a huge factor in players getting caught, and is one of the easiest ways to throw the game. During the laning phase, you only really want to ward the river when the lane is pushed, or over the wall, because you risk being sandwiched by their bot lane and mid lane player, giving up a free kill. Always make sure your warding is safe warding, or it could cost you the game. In addition to warding safely, you want to make sure that the wards you place are not right in front of all of your opponents, where they will be able to easily kill it before it becomes invisible, even without oracles. Usually one champion will be able to get about 2 attacks onto a ward before it disappears, so just make sure you are warding when your enemies are not nearby. Also, note that there are 2 types of warding, aggressive warding and defensive warding. Defensive warding is a bit more important than aggressive warding, but they are both still necessary. Defensive warding is something like warding the river so that you don't get ganked, while aggressive warding is like warding the in-lane bushes so that you can get free harass because of your bush control. Aggressive warding is very helpful in getting you kills, while defensive warding is very helpful in preventing you from getting killed. Try to do your best to balance out the 2 types of warding for the best effect, but you should ward a bit more aggressively when you're winning, and more defensively when you're losing. Counter warding, that is killing your opponent's wards with pink wards, is another very important concept. Mostly you just want to pay attention to the items that your opponents have in lane, and when you see them missing a ward, it is good to either time the ward so that you know when it's gone, each ward lasts 3 minutes of course, or kill it with a pink ward. This counter warding is pretty easy during the laning phase, because as long as you pay attention to what your opponents are doing, it should be obvious where they place their wards once you see less wards in their inventory. However, outside of lane phase, it is a bit harder to counter ward. Really, you can only just counter ward Dragon and Baron, or right after you see your opponents place a ward down. This is why pink wards are so strong in the lane phase, but once the lane phase ends, it is important to have an Oracle's Elixir instead on your team. One more thing to note is the all-important question of, how many wards should I buy? While there is no real answer to this, I think you should be buying about 3 to 5 or more wards every single time you back during the lane phase, and during the teamfight phase, unless you absolutely have to finish a major item, like a gold per 10 or Aegis. Lastly, as a general rule of thumb, when you are in a fight of any kind, you want to ward every brush you fight in, during the fight, so that you don't get juked. Juking in brushes is such a huge factor for someone being able to outplay you and get away, or get an extra kill, that if you see an enemy walk into a brush, just ward it immediately, and it will be much easier to get them. Now let's talk about the laning phase. For warding during the laning phase, there are a few important factors to consider. The first is that if you have no vision on the enemy jungler, you need to ward the river of course, but if you see the jungler's top, you can wait a bit and save some time on your wards. When warding the river, you should put 1 ward in the tri-brush and 1 ward at Dragon. This will show all possible jungler entry routes, as well as keeping Dragon, which is the main objective during laning phase, warded. If you only have 1 ward and need to ward the river, just plop the ward in or near the brush just outside of the river. Note that this is much less effective at stopping ganks than the wards of the tri-brush and Dragon are. But, if you have used up all of your wards and only have about 1 or 2 wards left, you can just ward the river there, and it will still be effective. These wards are defensive. The other important fact to consider is whether or not you are trying to play aggressive. If you are trying to play aggressive, even just a little bit, which in my opinion you should always try to play at least a little bit aggressive, you should ward the bushes in the lane, as it is extremely important to have bush control when playing aggressive. These wards make it easy to gain and maintain said bush control, which leads to free harass and zoning. These wards are aggressive. Those are the only real standard ward placements during the laning phase as a support. Now let's talk about the teamfight phase. During the teamfight phase, warding is pretty basic. You want to ward major objectives as well as warding up all bushes before a teamfight, or just the general area near the teamfight. A few major objectives include Baron, and deep into enemy lanes, but can also include Dragon and the buffs depending on how soon the lane phase ended. It is important to keep major objectives warded, especially Baron, so that your enemies can't sneak up on it and get that objective for free. Now, warding the map outside of major objectives after the lane phase is a bit tricky. First, it is very important to ward bushes in an area that you know that you are going to fight in. If my team is grouping up for a Baron fight, I will try to ward every single bush, or most likely, almost every single bush near Baron. A countless number of fights have been decided just because of bush vision. Juking is such a strong factor in fights in the jungle that it is extremely important to ward up bushes in the area that you know that you're going to fight in. You also want to ward up the jungle a bit so you have vision on potential gankers, random enemies, etc. You never ever want to face check a brush alone outside of the laning phase. This is one of the biggest factors to people throwing the game in solo queue. They face check a brush and die instantly to a 1v5 fight. Warding is huge in preventing that, so make sure you're always buying enough wards and always have enough vision. Lastly, if your opponents buy in oracles that you're having trouble killing, what you want to do when they clear wards is wait for them to leave the area and then ward the exact same spots that they just cleared. People clearing wards will almost always not go back to check on an area that they just cleared, because they just cleared it. So warding areas where your opponent's oracles just was will likely ensure that your wards will last at least a minute or two. Even if your opponent can kill your wards easily, and you can't ward effectively while they have their oracles, you still have to buy wards. You can't just play blind. You will lose like that, and your team will get caught over and over again if you play blind. So no matter what, always, always, always buy wards. So guys, those are just my tips for warding as a support. I'd love to discuss them with you guys in the comments. I'll see you next time.